Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we are joined by Ann Hood, who has written her seventh novel, and it has a very intriguing title, I think, The Knitting Circle, published by W.W. Norton and Company. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
I'd like to begin today in a way that I rarely begin one of these conversations, by going into your background a little bit. I can't resist this because I think the immediate background of this story has really helped you to make it as powerfully and as tightly written as it has become. And if I could just read from something the publisher sent us called About the Writing of the Knitting Circle. For my entire life, you write, reading and writing ways to work out what I felt, what I worried about, what I feared, what I hoped for. Then, on April 18th, 2002, my 5-year-old daughter Grace died suddenly from a virulent form of strep. As an added insult, when I lost Grace, I also lost my ability to use words. I couldn't read and I couldn't write. Letters didn't come together to make words. Sentences did not make sense. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. And then later on, you talk about Grace Paley's version of an old writer's saw. She says, write what you don't know about what you know. This novel is important to me as a writer, you conclude, as a woman, as a mother, and as a knitter.
Don't forget the knitting.
As a knitter. She's sitting here with the knitting in a bag off to the side. I'm really pleased for pausing in your knitting to do the interview. I hope you find comfort and hope and even knitting tips as you read The Knitting Circle. And I guarantee you that you'll find all of that, and I guess a lot more, depending upon the individual reader. So this was a heck of a place to start a book.
Oh, it sure was, yes. It wasn't the first thing that I wrote. About a year and a half after we lost Grace, I wrote an essay about grief and a second essay about knitting and grief, and then I had no more ideas, or so I thought. And then about a month passed, and the idea for the book came to me pretty clearly formed, that there would be a woman who had lost a child.
Mary Baxter is her name?
Mary Baxter. She would learn to knit and join a knitting circle. And at that time, what I really wanted to do was celebrate women and storytelling, because they had helped me so much. And, of course, knitting. We don't want to forget the knitting.
Yeah. The other thing about Mary, in terms of her background, is that she had become the kind of mother that she always wanted to become. She was participated in things that her daughter did very proudly, finger painting and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then when the child is taken away from her, she feels that her own life has ended.
Yes,
and I think that's so true. When a parent loses a child, I mean, that the old saw. You know, we're not meant to bury our children;
right.
They're meant to bury us.
Yes,
and so it's very true. It seems to me that she would freeze.
Yes.
Just as
I did.
Just as you did.
And in order to really write about that feeling, that paralysis that strikes, I played a little game of what if. And to separate myself, so I wasn't exactly telling my story. You know, I wanted the emotional truth of it. But I said, what if Mary lost her only child? Mm-hmm. And for me, that was a way to look at it slightly.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, because,
otherwise it would have been memoir, you know.
Yeah. Okay. And which I think is a very good caution on your part.
Yes.
Really. Never mind. We get into memoirs around here off and on. As I guess they do in any interview program these days. One of the interesting things, I would almost say funny, is that Mary's first advisor
Yes.
Is someone that she's not close to, even though it's her mother.
I know. Don't you love that mother?
Yeah. And Mamie, she's called.
That's right.
And her mother says, Mary, dear, what you should do is knit.
She also suggested she go to Cuba, if you remember.
Oh, that's right. A couple of times.
Cuba.
Yeah. And when Mamie says you should knit, Mary says, I hope I can say this right.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks a lot, Mom, right? Yeah. Well, I created that mother because I have a fabulous mother. And again, it was what if? What if you didn't have a mother to support you? And so I took something about my mom, which is she does not think she's very pretty. She's always felt unattractive. And so I made this character who thinks she's darn pretty.
Turn it around.
It turned it around. Yeah, it opened it up. It's the Grace Paley thing,
The knitting circle is full of many pleasures, and among them, I think, is a cast of wonderful characters, fellow knitters all. And we'll meet some of them when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Ann Hood is the guest, and she's here to talk about her latest novel. It's called The Knitting Circle, published by W. Norton and Company. Dr. Perry Glass, this is an MD doctor.
That's right.
Says this about the book in part. A wonderful, moving novel about all that matters most, love and friendship, and loss and grief, and company and comfort. And, of course, knitting.
Yay, knitting.
You have assembled the biggest bunch of knitters to both read and applaud this book. Now, the company and comfort part is important. It seems to me the company and comfort are two of what we might call benefits of knitting, at least knitting with a group.
Yes.
Like Big Alice's Sit and Knit, where you knit to save your life.
That's right.
Tell us about knitting.
Big Alice is a woman who owns a knitting store, and in my mind, she was like a magician. She saw the women who needed comfort in each other and invited them into this particular knitting circle. And, it is true that there are physiological benefits to knitting that really do comfort you.
I mean, just from the use of the hands.
Yeah, the repetitive motion, the tactile stuff of the yarn. That's a really nice word, the tactile stuff. The yarn itself, the sound, the clacking of the needle.
The sound, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, the thing the cloth, the wool is just great. The yarn.
Yeah, the yarn.
Skeins of it.
That's right.
I learned.
You've got the lingo.
I learned a few things.
I think you are a knitter.
Each woman in this particular circle that Mary Baxter participates in has a life story. And each of the stories is tinged with sorrow. For example, Lulu, who came out of a Chicago suburb with the nice-sounding name Louise Peterson. And then things went off in a different direction.
She went to New York City. You know what happens when you go there.
You become Lulu, I guess. Takes up glass blowing.
Yeah.
And goes back and forth to Venice, marries a fellow by the name of Smitty, and then really has a tragic thing happen to her.
Yeah, she is terribly, brutally raped walking her dog one morning by a small gang of teenagers in Tompkins Square Park, which is part of the East Village in New York. I set that in the time when I had first moved to New York, and that was still, now it's quite gentrified, but that was a little bit dicey then. Mm-hmm. And I liked that she was a glass blower because it sort of reflected her fragility. But, glass is always moving, and so was she.
And it was through glass blowing, you're right, that she became this person, Lulu Peterson. I teach a class every semester. I make my own glass. I knit. That's what I am. I'm afraid of things, the dark, the sound of wind, footsteps in the hallway, leaves rustling in trees, voices I can't identify, being out there alone. And I think that, captures the aftermath of that kind that kind of experience.
Yes. Well, when I lived in New York, that was around that time was the Central Park Jogger, a very famous story that really stuck with me, and I think a lot of women who lived alone in New York City then. And so that kind of inspired that story.
And at base, Lulu sees knitting as a kind of praying.
Yes.
Like she's got rosary beads.
Right.
It's one stitch is like a prayer, just like each bead is a prayer. It's perfect for contemplation.
Yes.
And Mary says, or for escape.
Right.
Okay. Now, one of the other people that is very interesting that we have in here is Ellen. Now, Ellen is she's kind of different. She comes from Appalachia.
Yes.
Or Appalachia.
Appalachia. Right? That's right.
And she's a folk singer and a musician.
Yep.
And what happens to her?
She falls in love very young with an Irish singer, a handsome boy. She says when she sees him, God, keep me from that devil, but it doesn't work. The devil wins. Takes her off to Ireland, thinking with such a beautiful voice and so much talent, he can maybe make money off her. And they have a baby who is born with a heart defect. And she is waiting in the book, in the knitting circle, for that baby, a heart transplant for that baby who's now a teenager.
And it eventually happens.
Yes, it does.
I mean, I don't want to suggest that all of this is down.
Oh, not at all, because what I wanted to do was actually show people or show women at different points in their life. Some of the stories happen 20 years earlier. Some are sort of midlife. They're happening as the book is unfolding, and some happen by surprise during the story. So it's just supposed to be a spectrum of life.
And through all this, the main character, if you will, Mary,
yes.
is also changing. She has difficulty, for example, in one conversation with Lulu. She wants to comfort her, but all these thoughts got caught in her throat.
Yes.
And she couldn't say it.
She doesn't know how to offer comfort at the beginning. Yeah. We don't want to say what happens at the end.
The Knitting Circle has one important character we have yet to talk about. The man, Dylan. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Our guest today is Ann Hood. She's speaking about her latest novel, The Knitting Circle, about which fellow writer Carolyn Levitt has in part this to say. The Knitting Circle kept me up all night reading. It is brilliant and brave and extraordinary. It does what the very best novels do. It takes a tragedy and finds the heart of the pain and turns it into shimmering art. That's a very interesting observation.
Yes.
A little bit too deep, perhaps, for some of us, but shimmering art.
You'll figure that out.
The thing is, I do agree with her about the all-night reading thing, because this novel is written very tightly. It makes you care for each character. And you think about reading novels, you think about the action keeps you going.
Right.
But here, it's your desire to know more about these individuals that it absolutely captures you.
That's great. I hoped for that. I hoped for that.
It's a very interesting kind of thing. You figure on one hand, well, not all that much going on. But there is a lot going on in terms of coming to understand.
That's right.
And to know some interesting people. And, somewhat at the heart of the pain, I thought, was a part that is truly the relationship between Dylan and Mary.
Yes. And
what's going on or not going on there.
Yes.
That's interesting and not easy to write.
No, a hard place to go. There is a statistic that with couples that lose children, 50% of those couples break up. Mm-hmm. The marriages break up. And I was fortunate that mine did not. And but again, I did what if. what if this drove us apart instead of pulled us together? And in the novel, Mary and Dylan are both trying hard. There are some tender moments between them still.
Yes, there are, yeah.
But ultimately...
Well, one of the things that I think pushes them apart, even though they don't want to be pushed apart, is that if you will, the daily response, the somewhat superficial daily response of each of them is totally different.
That's right.
He plunges into his work as a lawyer.
Yes.
And she's sitting at home watching one of my favorite channels, the Food Channel.
Yeah, exactly.
And
learning how to make pineapple salsa. And she knows that's pulling them apart. There are times when she actually pretends to get up with him, and it looks like she's going to set about on her day. And as soon as he leaves, she gets right back in bed and turns on the Food Network.
But at a deeper level,
yeah.
I think what that is sharing with us or telling us is that given this kind of situation, the woman has no way to let go of the reality.
Right.
A woman cannot bury this.
Right.
Unless, I suppose, total alcoholism or something like that.
That's right. And I think some people end up there. But no, that's true. And he re-enters the world. I mean, he has to go to work. He says to her he wants to be happy again. And that's something she can't really imagine at that point in the novel.
Absolutely not. No, she can't. She's struggling. And the only release she has, if that's the word, the only happiness is incredibly through knitting.
Yes.
Now, you researched knitting.
I did.
Are there circles out there,
absolutely,
masquerading as a place for people to hold it together?
There are, and it's not that you go to a knitting circle and necessarily everyone's telling their story. And in fact, when these women tell Mary their stories, it's out of the circle. They meet to knit.
That's right. That's a very interesting point. That never comes out. What does come out during the circle is a lot of support, a lot more about knitting, and once in a while a little sniping.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. They're not all touchy-feely all the time. But they take her off ostensibly to teach her a new stitch or how to do a certain pattern, and that's when they share their stories with her. But I think that at knitting circles, I have been surprised by somebody kind of blurting something about themselves because it feels so safe. You're with all that soft, woolly yarn, and everyone's relaxed. You're in the zone, and it's easy to say things.
And they're all friends.
Yeah, that's right.
They're all friends.
That's right. Of course, I'm compulsive, so I joined like 7 knitting circles. So.
That's why your knitting bag that you brought with you is so big.
That's right. I have a lot of projects to do.
Something from each of the knitting circles.
That's right.
At the end of the book, and I don't want to give away the end because it's, I don't think, fair to do that. You want to know the end, go buy the book and read it right through. It's not hard. You'll be up until midnight. But at the end, there's a kind of sense of full circle, a kind of a sense of acceptance and peace, because throughout the thing, what both Mary and Dylan don't want to do is accept the simple fact Stella is no more.
Right, that's right.
This is a very happy novel. Trust me. It's called The Knitting Circle. It's written by Ann Hood, who's been good enough to stop by and talk about it. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.